and welcome back to my channel. In today's video you have the next episode of Recent Reads. I believe it's number 6, but I've lost track by now. I'm checking in with the first book read, and that is Strike the Zither. Strike the Zither. Tricky to say. Okay, so I have read another book by Joan He. I read it not this past winter, but the winter before for the Goodreads Choice Awards 2021. It was on the young adult fantasy list, I think, even though it was more sci-fi, because I think there's sci-fi fantasy. And I thought that was fine. Interesting, not my style, okay. But I found myself intrigued enough to pick up this one, which is more fantasy than sci-fi, because I did find the writing intriguing. And once again, I found the writing intriguing, but also confusing. Joan He has this way of storytelling that kind of baffles me, but doesn't put me off, like doesn't turn me off because I'm confused. I'm just reading, going along with like, I don't understand how you're making a story out of this. But then you get to the end and you're like, oh, that's how you're doing it. Maybe I need to read the sequel to figure out if that's how you're actually doing it. That's how I felt with this. So in the first half-ish, 40%-ish, you are following Zephyr, as she is the chief and only strategist for this rebel warlord in this fictional early 400s-ish China. The plot of that portion builds and builds and builds. So if you're doing like typical plot structure, it's got copious rising action leading up to a climax. And I'm like, we look like we're at the turning point for this story, and we're like 37% through the book. How are you going to make this last? And then you get to what would be the start, maybe the start of the resolution, and things just whoop bang. What book am I reading? I don't understand what's happening here. That whole chapter where Zephyr is confused, boy howdy are you going to be confused. And even when it moves on and she gets back into that plot that was happening, you know that there's something else happening because there are little snippets thrown in there, but you're so confused. There's also so much political machination in here, and I really like that. So I got to the end of it, and the epilogue is from a point of view that is not Zephyr. And there's a little bit of intrigue sprinkled in, and you're like, oh, well, maybe I do have to read the sequel. So, was this a favorite book? No. Did I particularly 100% enjoy my entire read? No, because I like understanding what's going on as I'm reading. However, this proved a fascinating challenge. So, I don't think I'll be purchasing it to keep in my collection, but I will be picking up the sequel from the library to read. As far as what else I'm reading this week, I'm just going to be reading from my collection over there. Right now, I am reading The Door of No Return by Kwame Alexander. I'm only about 70-ish pages into it. I just love how Kwame Alexander's writing just flows. His poetry, his free verse is just beautiful. Once I finish that, I'm not sure what I'll pick up. Probably book 2 in the Graceling Realm series, because I still have 4 books in that to pick up, and I should read one a week, not once a week. So I'm off to do more reading. Okay, so checking in with another book read. I do not have a physical copy of it. I tried to get a physical copy of it, even though it's been released. I read it as an audiobook. I actually got an advanced listener copy on Libro FM through their educator affiliate link, and that book is Nubia by Lawrence Epps. I think I remember that correctly. And again, I followed up one slightly confusing yet intriguing book that I enjoyed and feel uncertain about, you know, with Strike the Zither, with another book that I actually was reading at the same time, you know, not literally the same time, but same days, that was confusing, but also intriguing, that I enjoyed, but am still confused about. So that's Nubia. So it's actually Nubia the Awakening. So it has a similar setup to a book that I read last year, which is Ballad and Dagger by Daniel Jose Older. And in Ballad and Dagger, there is a group that lived in a Caribbean island or somewhere around Bermuda that was Latinx, but something happened to the island. The island was drowned, and these people come over as refugees into New York City. And then the magic is unfolding and reawakening. But it was in modern day New York. Nubia does something very similar. It's again another island, but I believe, if I remember correctly, it was like escaped slaves or something. And it was this island in the Atlantic, I believe. But the time period is pushed forward about 90 years, 80, no, I can do math, about 70, 80 years. And it's climate crisis that drowns their island and causes all sorts of other changes to New York City. And so all of these Nubians are refugees in New York City, and they've been there for about 7, 8 years, and things start changing. So in this book, you have 3 primary perspectives and 1 female, 2 male. So Zuberi is the female, and then we have, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the other names because I can't remember, and I don't remember how they were pronounced. But anyway, the 2 male perspectives are cousins. The beginning of it is confusing, but also understandable, because it feels like it's a book that's going to be about climate change, about sci-fi, futuristic. But there's weird things happening that the characters don't understand. But there's like this fight, and somebody gets jumped, it's on the street, etc. And something weird happens, and I could not figure out what was going on for another couple chapters. I'm like, what on earth is happening? I was so lost. And granted, the characters also are lost at that time, because these powers are awakening in them. And they're like, what is going on? And no one is telling them anything until we get to about halfway through the book. And then they're like, they go into the whole backstory, and the village elders basically are telling them what happened and things that they had kept suppressed. Then I'm like, oh, okay, got it. Thank you. Could you have told us that a little sooner? That would have been nice. So confused in the middle there. I want to say this is sort of Afrofuturism, but I'm not 100% certain on it. But I believe that's the genre that Nubia fits in. And I find myself really intrigued by what's going on. Definitely intrigued enough to pick up the sequel. I believe, I haven't run it through Copilot yet, but I believe, just like Strike the Zither, that Nubia will be a 4-star. Okay, so coming at you with another update. I know that when I do these recent reads, my plan is to just talk about books that I've finished, and clearly, I'm not close to finishing this book. However, the chief reason that I requested this book is because Morgenthau, Henry Morgenthau Sr., was ambassador in the Ottoman Empire when the Ottoman Turks were carrying out the Armenian genocide. And that's something I'm very passionate about. And I wrote my master's thesis on the New York Times coverage of the Armenian genocide. And so I'm interested in the family for that reason. And I just read the 2 chapters in which the author, Andrew Meyer, talks about Morgenthau's experience in Constantinople during this time. And yes, it's a very short portion of a very long book. But it was really interesting reading this because there's something about reading an aspect of history that connects with you on a visceral level, and you get emotionally invested in what's happening to these people that, you know, really have no connection to you. And it's tragedies and things that you can read about in histories of the Holocaust or other terrible things in histories. But when it connects to you on a personal level, there's just something different about reading that. And for me, I always get that when I read about the Armenian genocide, because of my heritage, because of the study that I've invested in it, and the way that this history has been told or not told for decades, and only very recently, within the past decade or so, have more and more historians been talking about it and putting it in books like this. I'm not going to go off on details about it and stuff like that, because that's not the point of this video or my channel. But I think that what Meyer did was very well written, and I really appreciated the aspects that he provided that I didn't necessarily look at when I was doing my master's thesis, because I was very focused on the New York Times coverage. And so, yeah, I learned more about that aspect of it. But the aspect for Morgenthau is he's on the ground and how he's interacting with government officials, and some of the interactions that he had with Secretary of State Lansing, who took over after William Jennings Bryan resigned, were quite revealing. And these were not things that were covered in the paper and didn't see. Basically, they were ready to wash their hands of them. And in the book, it says something about Lansing saying basically these deportations were justified because they weren't loyal to the government and this was a war zone. So people deserve to lose their house if you just say that it was just deportations. So people deserve to lose their house because they're not loyal to the government? What kind of bullcrap is that? So it was very interesting. There was one point where I vehemently disagree with how Meyer portrayed it. And he said that historians decry the silence about the coverage of the genocide. And then he says something about the fact that, oh, they weren't actually silent. People weren't actually silent about it when it was, when it was happening. And that's something that I go, no, sir. Historians, yes, they had this outcry about the silence about this for decades. But the silence that they're talking about is not during the genocide. It's very well covered. I wrote an entire master's thesis on it. People knew about it. It was common knowledge. However, after the war ended, no one spoke about it anymore. That's the silence that historians decry. And I also learned that at one point, a German battalion leader, I forget his exact ranking, was actually in charge of the leveling of a primarily Armenian city. And a lot of times Germans would be like, oh, we were just observers. We weren't involved. So it's fascinating. It was just, I'm really enjoying this book. It's slow read, getting through it, but I knew I would be really invested in those 2 chapters. And those 2 chapters alone make me want to get the book, on top of the fact that I'm really enjoying what I'm reading. And while I'm here, I should probably go ahead and update about the book that I did finish. Talk about another hard-hitting read. This is The Door of No Return. The dust jacket is up there. This is the book by Kwame Alexander. And I'm trying to think, should I hold it up or not? No, I'm just going to set it down. So in this book, if you know anything about the history of the Atlantic slave trade and how those horrific atrocities were perpetrated, you know what the door of no return means. And that is this door that the captured Africans would go through as they were held captive for a while. They were usually prisoners of war or taken captive by other tribes. And they were brought and sold to the Europeans in that area, whatever nationality it was. And then once there was a big enough number, then they would put them on the ships. And so you know that that's where this book is heading. But for so much of it, it feels like almost slice of life of this kid as he's growing up, approaching this point in his life where he's about to go through initiation, about to become a man, go through one of those ceremonies. And he has beef with his cousin, who's not necessarily the greatest guy. There's a girl that he likes. He has this really great relationship with his older brother, but there's animosity between these 2 sections of the area that has sort of been, smoothed over, But then there's some sort of celebration or something that happens, and something happens with the main character's older brother that really ticks off the other side. I think they live in Upper, I don't remember the name of it, but they live in Upper, and then the incident happened with someone from Lower of whatever this area is. And that person was really connected to the leaders of that area. And so, with slavery, that there was a lot of retribution. So like on the, prisoners of war and etc. And it just is so utterly heartbreaking. It really, when certain things were happening, I just went, oh. You don't have the words to express the grief that it evokes. I don't know how Kwame Alexander was able to write this book. It's just so hard-hitting, so poignant, and so powerful. This book needs to be read, needs to get out there. It's phenomenal, but it is a very, very difficult read. Okay, so I'm back with another update on a Saturday afternoon. I have 3 books to talk about that I finished since the last time I update. One of those is an audiobook of an ARC that I have. It's an e-ARC, and then I got an Educator ALC or advanced listening copy on Libro FM. So I don't have a physical copy of it. And it is the book Come Home Safe by Brian Buckner. And unfortunately, I think that this book is my lowest rated of 2023 so far. Granted, there's not much throughout the year, but I hope that it's the lowest rated because I want to read a lot of good books. Anyway, so Come Home Safe. There are 2 parts to it, and both of these parts deal with an incident that happens to one of 2 siblings. You have Reed and Olive. Reed is a high school freshman and Olive is 12, so she's either a 7th or 8th grader. And they are mixed race. Their father is black, he is a public defender, and their mother is white. I don't remember what she does for work. And both of these incidents involve some sort of injustice that is happening to the siblings. I won't go into the details. But it felt very preachy, and it felt very didactic, teaching almost, and the narrative didn't really flow. It seemed like they were worst case examples of things, and I say that saying and knowing that these things happen to people of color all the time, which is horrible. But the way that it was written was very top down, was very storytime-esque. I'm struggling to come up with the word for it, but then I listened to the author's note at the end and everything about it made sense. Didn't mean I liked it, but it made sense. So Brian Buckner is not an author by trade. I believe he is also a lawyer. But he said in his author's note that he wanted to go into the story and use creating this story as an example of how to teach young people about their rights. That is a fantastic goal. Really like that idea. But what it meant was that in his story, he would pause the narrative so many different times to have the characters remember things that their dad told them, like full-on descriptions of their rights and the processes, which did not let the narrative flow. And it happened so frequently. And I realized after listening to the author's note, okay, he's intending this on purpose. He is using this as a teaching tool. He's not telling a story. So the characters were tools to him, not characters. So that explains why I didn't like it as much. I haven't run it through Compile yet. I probably will rate it about a 2.5 stars, maybe a 2, somewhere in there. I wish it had been better written. I really do. And I wish it hadn't been a teaching tool, because I think that these different kinds of real life experiences could be helpful. Additionally, the second incident, so the first incident really involves Reed, the older of the 2 siblings. Both siblings are present for both of these incidents. Reed is more the target in the first one, and then Olive is more the target in the second one. And in the second one, the absurdity of what the white woman in this case was doing and claiming, it just was like, why is no one looking at her like she's behaving like a lunatic? Because she was described as behaving like a lunatic. And if I were the person at the cafe that was dealing with her, I would look way more askance at her. I don't know. And I get that. I think that was part of it. And there was a point when someone called her a cafe Karen. I'll stop talking about that book because you know how I feel by now. The next book I read is Running While Black by Alison Mariella Desir. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was a very thought-provoking narrative, especially coming from a place where I, as a white woman, do not have to deal with a lot of the stuff that Alison does. Now, there's part of being a woman and a runner that's brought in there, but I want to set that aside because the things that she talks about in here that happen, me as a woman saying this and relating my struggles and the ways that people have objectified or whatever while I'm running, that would be denigrating. This is very valuable, and talking about, and this is something that has been on my mind and bothered me a lot, especially as I become more aware of things, especially after the tragic murder of Ahmaud Arbery and everything that arose in the summer of 2020. Now, Ahmaud Arbery was killed in February and it was brought to light weeks later, which is a travesty. But the fact that something I love so much is so white, and I look around and I see that and it really bothers me. Like, why is this? Why is something that I can enjoy fairly unscathed I don't have to think about a lot of these things in these areas. Why do people not get this? Why do people not understand what the problem is? This is very profound, very moving, very thought-provoking, and I highly recommend it. As it is a memoir, I'm not going to be rating it. I will be writing a review, and hopefully my review will be a little bit more eloquent than my thoughts right now. However, I do highly recommend this. This has given me a lot of food for thought. And the most recent book that I finished just about half an hour or so ago is something that is so powerful, so profound. I think I found yet another 5-star for the year. I haven't run it through Compile yet. And that is Angel of Greenwood by Randy Pink. I knew I had a high probability of enjoying this book because I have read her sophomore novel, which was, I don't remember the title, but anyway, it was an SCI sale book, not this past summer, but the summer before, so the summer of 2021. Ever since first learning about the Tulsa Race Massacre, I don't know why I don't realize to hold the book on the side, but ever since learning about the Tulsa Race Massacre, when I read the book Tulsa Burning before assigning it to my students, I have been so profoundly impacted by this, and I've hated the fact that someone with 2 degrees in history did not know about this until I read a young adult novel, a middle grade novel. Granted, it has gotten more prominence, it has been more talked about because for decades it was hidden, it was suppressed, and coming from like what I talked about before with the Morgenthau novel and how the coverage of the Armenian genocide and how that has so rankled me that people have suppressed that history and not talked about it. That was one of the first things that started to get me angry about the Tulsa Race Massacre, because for decades and decades, Tulsa and Oklahoma were not willing to admit that this whole town was burned to the ground and people were massacred just because of their race, just because of an incident that has never been verified. And even if it was something worthy of getting upset about, it's not worthy of committing a race massacre about. Sorry, got myself distracted. But I have been drawn to learning more about this and studying it and understanding it, and this book is so profound. So clearly, you know that this book is going to deal with hard topics. It's going to deal with the race massacres themselves. So much of the book is actually building this love story between these two main characters who are complicated characters who have a lot to deal with, a lot that's going on in their lives. And I love how Randy Pink has one of the characters be a massive fan and acolyte of W.E. Du Bois, and the other be the same for Booker T. Washington, because if you know anything about those two men, they had very contrasting philosophies about how Black people should deal with their lives and the injustices against them. And through those contrasting things, these characters are able to play off of each other and learn more and grow more. But at the same time, you know that this is looming. I don't know if you can see that in the background. You know that it's looming. And when it actually happens, I got so viscerally angry while reading it. Like, these people, these white people, specifically bombed a church where people had been going for refuge. They bombed a church. I don't know whether or not this actually happened. I don't know a lot of the details, but it wouldn't surprise me. She has this scene that the angel, the female protagonist, sees as she's trying to wake people up, because this happened in the middle of the night. She's trying to wake people up, and she's going by this very successful area, and there are white women who've come over, and they're going in and they're helping themselves to dresses and flowers. And it's like, are you serious? What is your problem? This is profound. It is angering. I get so infuriated at people who are not willing to acknowledge that things like this have happened. So much so that I'm not going to keep going with this review, because all I feel is, this book was amazing, but I'm also like ticked off at the true events that inspired this. So, 5-star read. Okay, so I'm here with my last update. And of course, it's first thing in the morning, so I look super tired. Don't know why, because I've been relaxing all morning. But anyway, and I do promise I wear other things than this, but it's just so comfortable. Anyway, one last update for this recent reads. Kiki Kalira Breaks the Kingdom. I'm so glad I got to end the week on this. This is adorable. I read this as an audiobook, so it was the audiobook I was reading yesterday and Friday. Sangamandana. So I read her adult romance first, like witchy romance, The Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and it was fine, but it just wasn't my style. But then I read this, and it is so adorable and profound at the same time, because the premise for this is Kiki is someone who, she's an only child. Her mom is widowed, and Kiki has recently started, like, her brain has started what she says, like, acting up, and she can't turn it off. She gets really anxious about things. And so the opening scene here, she and a friend, a group of friends I think, are out at a fair enjoying things, and all of a sudden she's like, I can't remember if I locked the front door. And her brain starts going a million miles a minute, going, like, I think she said, like, geese are gonna come in and kill my mom. And she's like, I know this is absurd. Like, this won't happen. But, like, my brain is itchy and I can't get it to stop. And so she leaves and goes and checks. And did she lock the front door? Yes. Is her mom fully capable of defending herself? Yes. And she knows all this, and she's just super bummed about it. And so she starts drawing more and more as a way to sort of calm her brain and put all these things in here. And of course, she's also, as she's doing this, she's like building this whole fictional world full of Indian mythology. And then that world comes to life, and there's some unexpected things that she has to go and solve, because apparently somehow she's the only one that can. And there's just such amazing characters that come to life in this book. The friend group is not like her real life friend group, because she spends most of the book in her kingdom, Mysore, I think is what it's called. The different characters that come to life here are just adorable and heartwarming And then like the events are happening and she's still dealing with her anxious brain, with the anxiety. And something happens about 70% through this book that I'm like, wait, what did you just do? What? She went there in a middle grade book, and the way it was handled was so beautiful and powerful. And I finished reading this book going, I want more. And so I looked up to see if this was a series, because it could conceivably be a series or a standalone. It's a series. I don't know how she did it. Sango Mandana had 3 books published last year, because this one and the sequel were published last year, as was The Secret Society of Irregular Witches. How did she do that? I don't know. But now I want to get the sequel and read it because it's just fantastic. I haven't run it through Compile yet, but I'm pretty sure it's either going to be a 4.5, a very high 4.5, or a 5-star read. So there you have it. There are all the books that I read this week. Going to go over it really quickly. I have 2 stand-ins for when I hold it up for the books that I don't have physically, and that was Nubia, read that as audio, which was a 4-star read, and Come Home Safe, which also read as audio, which was a low 2.5-star read. It was a 4 on the 10-point scale. Hopefully that will be my lowest rated this year. I would love for that to be. And then physically, I started the week by finishing, let's see, which one of these did I finish first? I started the week by finishing The Door of No Return, and the next one I read is Running While Black, which I'm not going to rate. So Door of No Return, 5 stars. Running While Black, not going to rate, but still an excellent book. Angel of Greenwood, I just finished this yesterday, another 5-star read. So adding Kiki Kalira onto that as another possible 5-star read, that would be 3 5-star reads in 1 week. I think February might be living up to the heights of January. I really like that. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.